Mr. Revolver Guy here with DayAtTheRange.com. Thank you for joining me today on the bench and wrapping up this mini-series of comparing the KimberK6s stainless revolver against various versions of the Smith & Wesson Model 640. Today will be a short video just wrapping up and potentially answering the question, should I sell off my 5-shot J-frame revolvers due to having the KimberK6? That's a very tall question. But let's get into it. Today we'll discuss ergonomics and carryability. We'll also discuss shootability or subjective felt recoil. We'll talk about trigger feel, trigger weight, accuracy, and also fit and finish. So let's get into it. First, we're going to start out talking about ergonomics or carry. And as you can see, I have the KimberK6s on the bench with me today. So the KimberK6s would be the standout in this category. As it pertains to ergonomics, it feels much like the J-frames of the Smith & Wesson or the smaller carry concealable revolvers out there on the market today. In my hands, which are very large hands, as you can see, I can get 2 fingers on the grip there. And by the way, those are snap caps for those that are wondering. I can get 2 fingers on the grip. I'm not crazy about the rubber blue grips, as you can see. Again, being a working revolver, they are getting somewhat dirty, but that's okay. It's expected. But my pinky finger dangles off of the grips, but I still feel like I have great control of the weapon when shooting .357 Magnum through this particular revolver. As it pertains to carryability, if there is such a word, as it pertains to carrying this revolver and why the Kimber over the other Smith & Wesson Model 640s, to me, this length here between the butt of the grip and the heel of the KimberK6s is much shorter, almost by inches, or an inch to an inch and a half, depending on which Smith & Wesson Model 640 we're talking about, but it's much shorter. And I noticed how I tested this was actually putting it inside of a holster from Alien Gear and wearing it about with the same shirt in each and asking my wife which one prints less with my love handles. So we're going to give ergonomics and carryability to the KimberK6. Now, we talked about these grips, and these grips do come in a wood-like model, but much of the same size. These grips, though, and their dimensions will hurt the KimberK6 in the next category of shootability and the subjective felt recoil test. Now, moving on to shootability or the subjective felt recoil. And as you can see, the winner is the Smith & Wesson Model 640 Magnum Centennial. Let's talk a little bit about this 640 Magnum Centennial. Again, 5-shot revolver, and for those wondering, those are snap caps. That's what I use to test the trigger pull and trigger weight, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But on shootability and subjective recoil, for those of you that have seen the previous episodes know that I shot Hornady Evolution .357 Magnum ammunition through the KimberK6 in this revolver. And they were pretty hot. Through the Smith & Wesson 686 4-inch that I used as a baseline, that ammunition shot across the chronograph was at 1,400 feet or a little over 1,400 feet per second. And the snub nose revolvers, they average a little over 1,200 feet per second. So they had a pretty good kick to them. But this revolver, or the makeup, the style of this revolver, I believe mainly due to the grips, was just much more controllable than the KimberK6. I'm not saying the KimberK6 was not controllable or I felt out of control or unsafe in any way, form, or fashion with that ammunition. These grips just feel so much better in the hand, and this revolver to me feels so much better in the hand. And I believe I know why. As I spoke about in the Kimber, with the Kimber, my pinky would dangle below the grip. So the grips were a bit shorter. As you can see here, my pinky finger has a firm grip. And by the way, guys, I don't naturally hold a revolver like this, right, with my thumb up here. It's just for display purposes only. But my pinky has a firm grip, a very firm grip on this revolver that just makes it so much easier to control with .357 Magnum ammunition. So shootability and subjective felt recoil goes to the Smith & Wesson Model 640 Magnum Centennial. Now, in the carryability where Kimber won out, as you can see, the grips are much longer. And from here to here, there's an 1.5 inch difference between the Kimber and this particular revolver, the Smith & Wesson 640 Magnum Centennial. But that's just due to the grips, really. As you can see there, there's additional wood down here on these grips. So, much more controllable, but you do give up some concealability. Again, I holstered it in a holster, asked my wife what she thought. She thought from time to time, depending on if I bent over, how I turned, how I sat in a chair, that these grips or the tip of these grips would oftentimes poke out. I think that more or less has something to do with my love handles poking them out. Need to get myself in a little bit better shape. But neither here nor there. Shootability and subjective felt recoil goes to the Smith & Wesson 640 Magnum Centennial. Now moving on to the trigger pull. And as you can see, I have yet a different Smith & Wesson Model 640 on the bench. This is, again, a rather special revolver, as there were only 250 of them made, and it is branded the Paxton Quigley out of the Performance Center. If you can see the logo there. Out of the Performance Center by Smith & Wesson. As it pertains to trigger of this particular revolver, it is not the lightest in the group. And some would say, well, how could you pick not the lightest? For those that saw the previous episodes in this mini-series, the Kimber came in at 10 pounds, the Paxton Quigley came in at 11.5 pounds, and the 640 Magnum came in at 12 pounds. Though with the Kimber being at 10 pounds, as you pull the trigger on the Kimber and the cylinder rotates, of course, being a 6-shot revolver, you can feel the chunk, if you will, or the turn of the cylinder as you are pulling that trigger. And also, I think with this particular revolver coming from the Performance Center, this is where the Performance Center often shines. It's in trigger jobs. Even though my RCBS trigger gauge came in at 11.5 pounds, the trigger feels much smoother and breaks much, much smoother than the KimberK6. I know there are plenty that are ranting and raving about the KimberK6 trigger pull, and they are absolutely right. They do have a nice trigger. I would also challenge those guys to get a trigger that's been worked on by the Smith & Wesson Performance Center, especially some of the older models like this particular revolver, and I believe you will see or potentially acknowledge what I am trying to explain to you, the viewer out there, that Smith & Wesson, especially in the Performance Center, really shines when doing a trigger job. So the trigger job goes to the Smith & Wesson Model 640 Paxton Quigley from the Performance Center. And back on the bench with us is the KimberK6s stainless revolver. Now we'll have a short little episode or short little take on accuracy. I would ask you all to refer back to the previous mini-series where I shot all 3 revolvers for accuracy, and it was clear to me when shooting from approximately 15 to 20 yards from a sitting position on the bench, rested via shooting bag, that the KimberK6 was the standout winner. I believe the KimberK6 was the standout winner in the accuracy department due to its sights. The sights to me are much better on the KimberK6 than on the Smith & Wesson Model 640. As you can see, the sights are all black, but it's notch. The rear here is adjustable for windage, but I found no need to do so. The front sight is also pinned, which I hope that this means Kimber at some point will release a Trijicon night sight as an accessory to swap out. But the KimberK6 definitely, at least with the Black Hills 38 special ammo, 158 grain, won out in the accuracy department compared to the Smith & Wesson Model 640s. Next, we'll be talking about fit and finish, so stay tuned. Now, we're going to talk about fit and finish. So how did I assess fit and finish? On my bench, I have a mounted magnifying glass that's rather large. So fit and finish to me, oftentimes you can find machine marks throughout a revolver or any pistol, and that's how I kind of gauge fit and finish as it pertains to these particular revolvers. I also looked at, as you saw in one of the mini-series, the cylinder gap as a testing method. So as it pertains to fit and finish, I stuck each one of these revolvers or used my magnifying glass to look underneath the top strap. Here on revolvers, you can often see a lot of machine marks, if not taken care of by the factory. Also, inside of the frame here, right underneath the barrel, you will find oftentimes a lot of machine marks, which doesn't hurt reliability, doesn't hurt function. Again, this is just about fit and finish. And one of the primary reasons for doing fit and finish as it pertains to these revolvers really is about some of the complaints I've heard about the KimberK6s being so expensive. In my neck of the woods, at least, the KimberK6s is in the same price range as the Smith & Wesson Performance Center versions of revolvers. And as it pertains to fit and finish at this point, we are going to give the standout to the Smith & Wesson Performance Center Paxton Quigley. And really that was based on, again, the cylinder gap. And for those that saw the previous episodes, you will know the cylinder gap measured with feeler gauges on the KimberK6 came in at 0.007. On the Paxton Quigley came in at 0.005. Really tight cylinder gap there. And on the 640 Magnum Centennial, that came in at 0.008. So it had the largest cylinder gap. I also noticed on the Smith & Wesson Magnum Centennial that underneath the frame here, there's quite a few, again, machine marks that you can spot out. Again, I had to use a magnifying glass to spot those machine marks. On the Paxton Quigley, I found very few machine marks at all on the Paxton Quigley. It is just a well-tuned revolver and really was taken care of by the Performance Center. On the KimberK6, I found very little machine marks, a little bit better than the 640 Magnum Centennial, but definitely, again, the standout was the Paxton Quigley 640 38 Special. It also won this category, again, because of the cylinder gap. I really wish that Smith & Wesson and other revolver makers will tighten up the cylinder gaps like on the Paxton Quigley. I really wish the standard was at 0.006, but Smith & Wesson, I've had them tell me directly that up to 0.010 is their standard at the current time. So again, the fit and finish goes to the snub nose Paxton Quigley 38 Special Performance Center Smith & Wesson 640. Stay tuned as we finish up with overall winner and potentially in answering the question, should I sell off my 5-shot J-frame CCW revolvers? And we're back on the bench with the overall winner. The overall winner in this series is the KimberK6s stainless revolver. As you've seen, the KimberK6 won in ergonomics. It came really close in trigger pull, but was edged out by the Paxton Quigley. It won in the accuracy department and also finished second in fit and finish to the Paxton Quigley. I just really like the KimberK6, and I think Kimber is on to something. The fit and finish of this revolver is awesome. The trigger is an awesome trigger. Just some of the advances that they've brought to the cylinder and squaring up the cylinder or flattening out the cylinder, if you will, to get that additional 6 round in there is probably the main reason that this revolver is the overall winner, with the Paxton Quigley running a very, very close second. Now, to the question of should I sell off or will I sell off my 5-shot J-frame revolvers? First and foremost, I want to thank the person that loaned me the test subjects that you saw in this mini-series. They do not belong to me, so obviously I can't sell those, and I will be cleaning them up shortly after this video and returning them to their rightful owner. And I want to thank that person. I want to thank that owner for loaning them to me and trusting me with such nice revolvers and such prized specimens in revolvers. I really thank you for loaning those to me. Now, to the question of will I sell off my 5-shot revolvers? That includes Smith & Wesson model 642, which has been on my side for many, many miles on my motorcycle, which has traveled with me to many different states and has been a mainstay on my side. And I say to that, I will not be selling that revolver. The Kimber is really close to perfect, but not perfect enough to make me go out and sell the 5-shot or the few 5-shot revolvers that I have. I will continue to use those 5-shot revolvers as backup to the KimberK6. If something were to happen to the KimberK6 where I had to send it back to the manufacturer, I would at least have a backup and wouldn't have to go without. Thank you for joining me on the bench, Mr. Revolver Guy, DayAtTheRange.com.